Hi, my name is Albert Caruana, and I am the Game Master of A Candle or the Night, a Star Wars Force and Destiny adventure. I wanted to take a moment to provide an instructional video to explain and maybe demystify some of the ways in which the dice system in this game work. Star Wars Force and Destiny, as well as Edge of the Empire and Age of Rebellion, all use the same dice system. I thought I would provide perhaps a little instruction and guidance as to the symbols on the dice, how they work, how dice rolls are constructed, so that when you are viewing or listening to the show, you won't be confused. Some of our own heroes have spent a lot of time trying to figure out what the dice symbols mean, and some of them still, in fact, are calling successes little explodey things and calling advantages UN symbols. So you'll hear this on the show. I laughed. I'm sure you'll laugh too. But I figured this video would help by kind of helping to explain what the dice mean conceptually. So let's begin with an explanation of what it is to make a check in a role-playing game. So numerous times throughout our show, you'll hear me ask our heroes to make a check. Whenever a player wants to attempt to use an attack or a skill or determine how their character might react in a given situation, it's convention in role-playing games to require the player to make a check. And this represents how chance and skill might affect the outcome. Let's give a simple example. Let's say during our game, I want to see if a player on the party team knows anything about a given planet. I might ask the party to make a intelligence-based check, a knowledge check. And this is supposed to represent a combination of things. The character's natural characteristics, for instance, their intelligence, as well as any special education or training they've received. Maybe they learned about the planet in their equivalent of school. Perhaps they had spent time in the field there. So that, as well as we want to include a representation of random chance. Maybe you know, but just couldn't remember at that moment. So the dice in the Star Wars Force and Destiny system take all these things into account. If the player rolls well, then they succeed and are able to recall pertinent information about that planet. If they roll poorly, then they simply cannot recall any information that's useful. And what makes the dice system in this game so interesting is that it offers a lot of other narrative possibilities to make role-playing fun. Let's talk more about the dice in Fantasy Flight Games, Star Wars Force and Destiny system. So the dice used is not very intuitive on the surface, but once you figure it out, it provides a lot of depth and narrative potential to every single check that you make. What I'd like to do in this video is first give you a summary of what all the dice are called, what the symbols mean on the dice faces, and finally descriptive examples to show how they would be used in play. And since some of our listeners come from a Dungeons & Dragons background and maybe are just new to Fantasy Flight Games, I'll also compare how a given check might be handled in D&D, just to give you sort of a frame of reference. Let's begin with the 7 different types of dice. There essentially are 3 positive types of dice and 3 negative types of dice, and then 1 type to represent the Force. The positive dice represent the player's natural ability, any circumstance or boosts that they might have at a given moment, as well as any special training they've received. The negative dice, in each case, represent the polar opposite of these. For example, the difficulty of the particular action they're trying to check, any circumstances in the moment that might obstruct them, and then any special challenge or perhaps training of an opponent working against them. Before we go into more detail on the dice, let's briefly discuss what the possible dice results mean. In general, any dice result in Star Wars Force and Destiny will basically tell you 3 things. Did you succeed or fail? Did anything else good or bad happen while you were taking that action? And lastly, did anything exceptional happen while you were taking that action? There are symbols on the dice to represent the answers to each of these questions. On any dice roll, the first result that matters is whether or not you succeed or fail on what you're trying to do. On the dice in Star Wars Force and Destiny, the success symbol looks like a little explosion. The failure symbol looks like a triangle. you might find more than one success or failure on a given roll. And in that case, what you do is you just cancel out any success with a failure and see what remains. If there is a failure left, or there's nothing left, in other words, all the failures and successes canceled and you're left with nothing, then that check fails. If you have at least one remaining uncanceled success, you will succeed. Now, if we were playing D&D, this is where things would stop. You would have a difficulty or a DC set for any given check, and if the player rolls greater than that, they succeed, greater than or equal to. If they roll less than that, they fail. In this system, however, there's more complexity to the results of the roll. There's another pair of results that can come up. Now, they have nothing to do with whether the actual action succeeds or fails, but rather they tell us if something else, good or bad, happened during the attempted action. They're called advantage, which one of our players described as a UN symbol or a laurel, and threat, which sort of looks like an imperial symbol. An advantage means that something beneficial happened, separate from succeeding or failing, during the attempt to complete the action. Conversely, a threat result will mean something undesirable happened, separate from success or failure. The interesting part about that is you can succeed but still have bad things happen by rolling success and threat, or you can still have good things happen even though you fail by rolling a failure and an advantage. Threat and advantage results do cancel each other out. However, only the remaining uncanceled threat or advantage get interpreted in the roll. Also, multiple threats or advantages can have special meanings. For example, the most common has to do with critical hits. Let's say you're shooting your blaster pistol and roll a success and 3 advantages on the roll. Not only would you hit, but you would score a critical hit, which would cause extra damage and cause a crippling injury to the enemy. On the other hand, let's say the player rolls successes on his check to fire his blaster rifle at a stormtrooper, but he also rolls 3 threat. What does that mean? Well, the attack hits and the stormtrooper takes damage. But let's say in this case, the player then discovers his rifle is out of ammunition and can no longer be used for the rest of the encounter. Descriptions of the meanings of what threat and advantage indicate during a check allow for some creative thinking on the fly and create opportunities for exciting nuances to gameplay. It's typically convention in the game for the player to get to decide how to spend their advantages or triumph, and for the GM to decide what threat and despair mean. The last pair of results you can get are sort of very special results. We'll say they're sort of reminiscent to rolling a natural 20 in D&D, or conversely a natural 1. The positive side of that is called triumph, which looks reminiscent of the Jedi logo, sort of. And the flip side is despair, which looks like a triangle with a circle around it. These results mean something exceptionally beneficial in the case of triumph, or something exceptionally unfortunate in the case of despair happened on the roll. These results do not cancel each other out like successes and failures do. And a triumph automatically counts as a success, and a despair automatically counts as a failure. As I said, D&D players will be familiar with the concept. Rolling a triumph is a lot like rolling a natural 20, and rolling a despair is sort of like rolling a natural 1. Now, let's summarize the actual dice themselves. First, we start with 2 8-sided dice. There is a green one, which represents a player's ability, their brawn, for example, their intellect, intelligence, their cunning. A player with a higher natural ability will get to roll more green dice with any roll. The possible results on a green dice include success, advantage, or a blank result. The flip side of the green dice is a purple dice. Those are called difficulty dice. They represent how hard or difficult a given action is that the player is attempting. This difficulty is set by the GM much the same way they would set a DC for a check in Dungeons & Dragons. For example, jumping over a small puddle might only require rolling 1 purple dice on your check. On the other hand, jumping over an 8-foot wide chasm might require you to roll 4 purple dice. In general, the more purple dice required on a roll, the more likely you are to fail. The possible results on a purple die indicate failure threat, and blank faces. So moving on to the next type of dice, we have two 12-sided dice. There is a yellow one, which we call the proficiency die, representing a player's skill or special training within a given field. A player with more experience points invested into a skill will get to roll more proficiency dice. The possible results on a proficiency die are the same as for the green ability die, except they also include the possibility of a triumph. So more proficiency dice mean a better chance of success and, more importantly, a better chance of critical hits and really positive outcomes. On the other hand, the other side of this coin is the red challenge dice. This represents an exceptional challenge in a difficulty of an action, such as what if one of your opponents is specially trained to oppose you, or there's extremely unfavorable circumstances. Possible results in a challenge die are the same as a difficulty die, except with the added possibility of rolling a despair. Thus, having to roll more red challenge die on a check increases your chance of failing and increases your chance of getting a catastrophically bad outcome. Next, we have two 6-sided dice. You can think of these as circumstance modifiers. The positive one is the blue boost dice. Possible results on that include successes, advantages, or blank faces. And the negative one is called a setback die. Possible results on that are failure, threat, or blank faces. So the purpose of these die are to allow the GM to add minor modification to the chance of succeeding or failing based on the immediate circumstance which the player finds themselves when they're trying to make an action. For example, if you're trying to stealthily sneak through an enemy's base at nighttime, you probably will get to roll a boost dice with the stealth check to represent the beneficial effect of the cover of night and darkness. Alternately, if you haven't slept in 3 days and are fatigued, any attempt to make an athletics check might require adding a setback dice, a black dice, to represent your fatigue, making success more difficult. This is thematically similar to how in D&D 5th edition you may be given advantage or disadvantage on a roll by the DM. The last type of die we use in this game system is called the force dice. It's a 12-sided white die that either has light points, dark points, or blank faces on it. These results help to generate light or dark side force points that players or NPCs can use to fuel their force abilities. They're typically only rolled during a force power ability check. If a player rolls at least one light side point, they can activate their force power. Some powers may require multiple light side points to function to their full potential. If the player rolls dark side points, they fail to activate the power unless they elect to use the dark side points, which has consequences mainly to the character's morality. So let's look at some examples that might help clear this up for you. On our first example, Escape from Bespin. The party is attempting to flee a facility that has been overrun by Imperial troops. Their way is blocked by a locked bulkhead. Their trusty astromech droid, R2, decides to make a slicing check to attempt to override the lock. The results of his slicing skill check are a failure and a despair. This means he fails to unlock the door, and in a particularly unfortunate turn of luck, he accidentally uses a power outlet instead of a slicing port, overloading his circuits and staggering him for the next round.
This way. Well, don't blame me. I'm an interpreter. I'm not supposed to know a power socket from a computer terminal.
In example number 2, Lightsaber Duel. Darth Vader faces the young Jedi Luke Skywalker in one-on-one lightsaber combat. After trading blows the previous round, Lord Vader starts his next turn by making a combat check using his lightsaber skill. The result of his roll is 2 successes and a triumph. What does this mean? Well, he hits young Luke dealing damage, but spends this triumph to inflict a critical hit. And, well, we all know how this ends. In our next example, Throne Room Negotiation. Now a full Jedi Knight, Luke Skywalker travels to the palace of Jabba the Hutt to negotiate for the release of his friends. He decides to use his Force influence power on Jabba the Hutt to compel Jabba to adopt a more favorable attitude towards him. He rolls both his Force die and his negotiation skill check. His results are 3 light side points on the Force die, enabling him to activate his Force power. However, his negotiation skill check results in 2 successes and 2 failures. The successes and failures cancel each other out, resulting in no successes, which, well, is a failure.
Yaku tacha kapunyo ni saki.
In our fourth example, Dark Side Coercion, the former Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker has fallen to the dark side corruption of the Emperor. He is confronted by his former mentor and longtime friend, Obi-Wan, who implores Anakin to see the folly of his ways. Anakin is completely unswayed, and on his turn makes a coercion skill check to convince his former master to join him in forging a new empire.
Don't make me kill you. Anakin, my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy! If you're not with me, then you're my enemy.
The results of Anakin's coercion check are 2 failures and 3 threat. Thus, he fails in convincing Obi-Wan to join him, and the threat indicate his reputation with his former friend becomes so damaged that the only outcome can be battle.
Only a Sith deals in absolutes. I will do what I must. You will try.
And in our final example, example 5, Sabacc Showdown, Han Solo and Lando Calrissian face off in a high-stakes game of Sabacc. Lando decides to cheat, so he makes a skullduggery skill check with boost dice, due to the fact that he has a secret card called a Skifter concealed up his sleeve. It is time for the showdown, and Han reveals his hand, and it's a good one.
You played me. You're good. Yeah. You're very good.
The results of Lando's roll are 3 successes and 3 threat. 3 successes wins back Lando's original wager, times 3 since he got 3 successes.
But not good enough. Full Sabacc.
However, the 3 threat need to be resolved. In this case, the GM decides that Han noticed the cheating. The GM awards Han boost dice to Han's next deception or skullduggery skill check against Lando. Han, being the clever rogue that he is, waits until their next game and spends those boost dice in a successful skullduggery check to stealthily steal the Skifter card from Lando's sleeve. Their next game goes a little bit differently for Lando.
Not bad. Not bad. You know, if you'd only had this little green Psylocke, you would have beaten this.
I hope these examples have helped to clarify how the dice results work in Star Wars Force and Destiny game system. Join us for our ongoing adventures to see how dynamic and rich the results of these simple skill checks can be in the system. May the Force be with you, and may every roll bring success and triumph.